it is incredibly crucial to notice how the Gospel of John explicitly frames these events, because it shifts our entire perspective right from the jump. In the text, they are specifically called signs. And a sign is defined as a miracle that points to deeper spiritual truths about Jesus' identity, compassion, and authority, rather than just being a raw display of supernatural muscle. Think of it kind of like a literal street sign on the highway. You aren't meant to just pull over and stare at the metal and paint of the sign itself, right? The value is what that sign is pointing you toward down the road. We're here to decode that meaning. According to the source material, these signs demonstrate absolute authority over some very specific domains of human existence. We're talking nature, disease, demons, sin, and ultimately death. Essentially, every miracle recorded in the text is categorized as asserting total dominance over one or more of these areas. So this is the very first recorded miracle in John chapter 2. And the narrative tension here is just intensely cultural. Step 1, Jesus is at a wedding celebration with his mother and his disciples, and the wine runs out. Now, in first century culture, you have to understand this wasn't just a minor catering hiccup. No way. This was the ultimate social faux pas. I would cause immense, lasting public embarrassment for the host family. Step 2, Jesus steps in. He instructs the servants to take 6 massive stone jars and fill them up to the absolute brim with water. Then, step 3, when the servants actually draw from those jars, the text states the water has completely transformed into exceptionally high-quality wine. Boom, social disaster entirely averted. But let's look at the real significance here. Symbolically, taking water that was originally meant for old ceremonial washing and turning it into this vibrant new wine, that points directly toward the concept of the new covenant replacing old, rigid ceremonial systems. The core spiritual takeaway the text offers us here is transformation. It's about taking the completely ordinary and fundamentally changing its nature into something totally new. Just look at the stark contrast in these quotes. It perfectly captures the dynamic of these sea narratives. First, you've got this sheer, unadulterated panic of experienced, lifelong fishermen who are trapped in a violent storm, screaming, "Lord, save us, we are perishing." And then, you contrast that with the calm, commanding response of Jesus across both of these narratives. "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." It is literally putting the total chaos of nature right next to the absolute calm of divine authority. And this brilliantly illustrates the nuance between these two events. First, you have calming the storm, which shows pure authority over chaos. Jesus wakes up, rebukes the wind, and just instantly brings peace. The source explicitly notes this intentionally fulfills Old Testament descriptions of God controlling the seas. But then, walking on water goes a whole step further. It's not just calming the weather anymore. It's demonstrating power over literal, physical laws like gravity and buoyancy. It reveals divine identity while teaching this super practical lesson. When Peter tried to step out and walk on the water himself, his faith only worked when he stayed focused on Christ, and it completely faltered the second he looked at the storm around him. Picture the narrative arc of the miraculous catch of fish from Luke 5. It starts with disciples who are just completely exhausted. They have been fishing all night long with zero results. Nothing. Then, Jesus commands Peter to row out into deep water and drop the nets again. Now, Peter is highly doubtful. I mean, you've got a carpenter giving fishing advice to a seasoned professional. But he obeys. And immediately the nets become so packed with fish they actually begin to snap. Notice Peter's reaction here, though. He doesn't celebrate the massive financial windfall. Instead, he's struck with utter awe and falls down, declaring his own sinfulness in the presence of the divine. And that realization directly leads to his discipleship. So the crucial takeaway derived from the fishing narrative is that the text connects the act of obedience directly to the resulting blessing. Peter had to act. He had to throw the nets over, even when the instruction seemed totally unreasonable and backward to his logical, experienced mind. And hey, speaking of provision completely defying logic, let's look at the sheer math of this next event for a second. 5 loaves, 2 fish, 5,000 men fed in a remote area. 12 baskets of leftovers. That's enough to boggle the mind. This is the ultimate example in the text of supernatural multiplication. It literally starts with almost nothing and ends in an overwhelming, impossible surplus. This massive feast definitely demonstrates ultimate provision, sure, but more importantly for the original audience, it echoed a very specific historical event, God feeding the nation of Israel with manna in the wilderness. By doing this, the text establishes Jesus' identity with the title, The Bread of Life. The spiritual takeaway here is loud and clear. What is placed in God's hands becomes more than enough. I want you to think of this as your master key. We can explicitly connect each physical, historical event from the source material directly to its designated spiritual takeaway. Turning water to wine shows the transformation of the ordinary. The crazy catch of fish links obedience directly to blessing. Calming the storm shows peace being brought into total chaos. Walking on water illustrates how focus fuels faith. And feeding the 5,000? That proves that what is surrendered becomes enough. The text is incredibly consistent in using physical, tangible realities to teach deep spiritual concepts. Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. We've seen today that the source material definitely doesn't view these as mere magic tricks, but as highly intentional markers. So, if these events were purposefully recorded as signs meant to decode identity and authority, what deeper truth are they pointing you toward today? Keep that master key in mind.
So in this first category, the source text introduces us to what it calls nature miracles. These are those mind-bending moments where the physical laws of the universe are just completely bypassed by a single command. Let's look at our first major event, the feeding of the 4,000. Imagine the scene here. You've got this massive crowd that has been hanging on Jesus' every word for 3 solid days, and their food supply is totally gone. They start with incredibly meager provisions. We're talking just 7 loaves of bread and a few tiny fish. Yet through this massive divine multiplication, not only are 4,000 men completely stuffed, but they actually have exactly 7 baskets of food left over. I mean, the sheer mathematical scale of that result completely defies the physical limits of what they started with.
But what's really fascinating is how the text unpacks the deeper meaning here. This wasn't just some flashy magic trick, it was deeply purposeful. First off, it showed his immense, totally practical compassion for a hungry, exhausted crowd. Second, it demonstrated continued divine provision. It's this idea that God doesn't just provide once and say, good luck. He keeps on providing. And third, and this is a big one in the historical context, this specific event confirmed his concern for literally everyone, both Jews and Gentiles alike.
The core spiritual takeaway that the text distills from this event is this really powerful thought: God continues to provide even after previous blessings have been received. It beautifully anchors this massive, spectacular nature miracle right down to a deeply personal truth about relentless, ongoing care.
Moving along, the text throws us a couple of, frankly, pretty bizarre curveballs that are just incredibly fascinating. In the first one, tax collectors roll up to Peter. Jesus tells them, hey, go to the lake, catch a single fish, and sure enough, inside its mouth, Peter finds a coin worth the exact, down-to-the-penny amount needed to pay the temple tax for both of them. Crazy, right? Then, in total contrast, we have the withered fig tree. Jesus walks up to this super leafy tree that has absolutely 0 fruit on it. He gives it one single spoken command, may no fruit ever come from you again, and the tree just instantly withers.
These two events brilliantly illustrate the sheer spectrum of this divine authority. Just look at the contrast. The coin and the fish reveals this hyper-specific supernatural knowledge. It shows that God's provision actually extends to the most mundane, annoying, practical needs of life, like paying a literal tax bill. On the flip side, that withering of the fig tree, that stands as a pretty severe symbol. It's a direct judgment on spiritual hypocrisy. It's essentially a critique of any religion that looks super healthy and leafy on the outside, but produces absolutely 0 real substance. The message is clear. God is looking for genuine spiritual fruit, not just a nice window display.
Then we get to this beautifully simple command, cast the net on the right side. This happens after the resurrection. Picture the disciples, they are totally exhausted. They've been fishing all night long on the Sea of Galilee, pitch black, and they have caught absolutely nothing. Jesus appears, gives them this one incredibly simple piece of direction, and suddenly, their nets are bursting with exactly 153 huge fish. The text points out that this specific miracle confirmed his resurrection. It served to beautifully restore Peter after he had messed up earlier, and it taught this profound lesson. True, abundant success comes directly through obedience. When we take a step back and synthesize all 9 of these nature miracles, this incredible pattern jumps out at you. Turning water to wine shows total transformation. Calming a raging storm and casually walking on water, that proves absolute mastery over the laws of physics. The mass feedings show abundant provision for everyone. The tax coin and the withered tree show him as both this wildly detailed provider and a righteous judge. The big overarching takeaway from the source material? As creator and sustainer, absolutely nothing, and I mean nothing, in creation is outside of his authority. Deliberately slow down here for a second, because the text treats this as the absolute, undisputed narrative climax. Everything we've talked about so far is just pointing directly at this one singular event. Let's trace the timeline the text gives us. Day 1, after the crucifixion, Jesus is buried in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. They roll this massive, incredibly heavy stone over the entrance, and just to be totally sure, they post elite Roman guards right outside. But then, we hit the 3rd day. It's early Sunday morning, women arrive at the tomb only to find that heavy stone completely rolled away, the tomb totally empty, and angels standing there announcing that he's risen. And the text makes it clear this wasn't just some vague rumor. The post-resurrection period includes actual physical appearances to Mary Magdalene, the apostles, James, Paul, and, get this, to a crowd of over 500 believers all at the exact same time. Now, the source text takes a specific moment to explain why this miracle is in a completely different league. Up until now, we've seen divine power exercised upon things, nature, trees, fish, other people. But the resurrection, it's entirely different. As the text quotes from John 10, Jesus said, "I lay down my life, I have power to take it again." He actively raised himself from death through his own divine power. It wasn't power applied to him from the outside, it was this active ultimate triumph from within.
So, why does the text put so much emphasis on this? It's all about the massive theological weight it carries. The sources declare the resurrection as the absolute ultimate proof that Jesus is the Son of God. It confirms that the penalty for sin was officially paid in full and the sacrifice was accepted. It shows that death itself, the ultimate enemy, has been completely conquered and Satan's power is totally broken. On top of that, it perfectly fulfills these incredibly specific ancient prophecies from texts like Psalm 16 and Isaiah 53. The argument the source makes is pretty blunt. Without this specific event, the entire Christian faith would have absolutely zero foundation.
And that brings us to this spectacular capstone thought. The spiritual lesson embedded here is just profound. The resurrection teaches that God can bring life where there appears to be only death, hope where there seems to be despair, and victory where defeat seems certain. It's the ultimate, undeniable display of cosmic authority over the finality of death itself. But, this leaves us with a really compelling question. One that elegantly bridges the massive, cosmic scale down to the intimate, everyday level. After commanding the vast oceans and after defeating the absolute, terrifying finality of death, how does all that mind-blowing power actually touch down when it comes to the daily, painful suffering of a single individual?
In this final section, we discover that this immense divine authority wasn't just being flexed to prove a point or even just to save souls in some abstract, far-off way. It was actually used to intimately heal the physical sickness and brokenness that we deal with every day. Let's set the scene with this incredibly touching encounter in Capernaum. A royal official comes to Jesus and he is in a state of absolute, terrified desperation. His son is dying. The dad pleads with Jesus, totally expecting what any of us would expect, that the healer needs to physically travel to the house, stand by the bed, and perform the healing in person. But Jesus doesn't go with him. Instead, he just speaks a single command: "Go your way, your son lives." The official actually believes him, turns right around, and heads home. And while he's on his way back, his servants come running down the road to meet him with the most incredible news: the boy has recovered. When the dad asks them exactly what time the fever broke, he realizes it was the exact, literal second that Jesus had spoken those words from miles away. It brilliantly shows that true faith is trusting the promise before you ever see the visual proof. His authority over sickness clearly isn't limited by geography. And what's wild is that this authority isn't just limited to physical illnesses, it totally dominates the spiritual realm too. The text shares this really dramatic showdown in a synagogue. Jesus is confronted by a man possessed by an unclean spirit. And the fascinating part? The demon instantly recognizes him. It cries out in absolute sheer terror, "I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus simply rebukes the spirit, tells it to leave, and it immediately obeys. Spiritual darkness just literally cannot stand in the room with his authority. As we wrap up our analysis today, the core takeaway from these healing miracles really crystallizes. They represent this beautiful dual nature. On the one side, you have this absolute, unquestionable, terrifying authority, the power to heal physical sickness from miles away, the power to completely silence spiritual darkness. But on the other side, perfectly paired with all that raw power, is an unbelievably deep, personal compassion for human suffering. The text tells us he doesn't just have the power to fix our brokenness, he actually has the heart to want to do it. Which leaves us with one final thought to ponder together. If the historical source material we've unpacked today reveals an authority that can command oceans with a whisper, break the absolute finality of death from the inside out, and heal a dying kid from miles away, how might really grasping that kind of power fundamentally reshape the way you and I view our own moments of despair, illness, and brokenness today? Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking the big questions, and seriously, I highly encourage you to go dive into these texts for yourself. Catch you next time.
Thanks for watching.
Stay blessed and don't forget to share this video with everyone.